Hello and welcome to Policy Watch, your snapshot on the week's biggest business stories, their context, their relevance and their impact. I'm Surabhi Upadhyay. Well, CBI versus a former SEBI chief, a volatile week in the currency markets, and a major Japanese corporation finally giving in to agitation from Indian shareholders. We discuss all this and more with Vinay Pandey, who is the economic editor at The Economic Times. Vinay, good to have you in the studios. Thank you for taking out the time. All right, let's start then with the first story. A former senior regulatory chief, a man believed to have an impeccable integrity record, now named in a CBI inquiry. Interestingly, this is one case where more fingers are being pointed at the investigative agency rather than the official in question, former SEBI chief CB Bhave. Here is the dramatic face-off as it stands right now.
Two big faces in SEBI. Its chief CB Bhave and former whole-time member KM Abraham, both well regarded for their integrity, now named for a CBI probe. The agency clarified it was probing the role of Bhave and Abraham in granting license to MCX SX to start a currency exchange in 2008 and for renewing the license in 2009 and 2010. It's a long list of allegations against the two senior officials. Under CB Bhave, the Securities and Exchange Board of India allegedly allowed MCX SX to trade in currency futures despite being aware about the fact that promoter companies FTIL and MCX had been raided by income tax authorities in the past. CBI is also probing why MCX's license was renewed in 2009 and 2010 despite the fact that the company did not comply with the SEBI's condition to dilute its shareholding. The CBI is separately probing a multi-crore scam against National Spot Exchange Limited promoted by Jignesh Shah. Even as the SEBI chief had demanded an apology, the move has raised a storm in political and industry circles. Finance Minister P. Chidambaram and Rural Development Minister Jairam Ramesh have already criticized the agency's move, with Ramesh even alluding to a conspiracy to fix the two honest officials. Finance Minister P. Chidambaram said, and I quote, "The original license granted to MCX SX was only to deal in currency futures. It was not a license to deal in equity. I think the distinction is important," unquote. HDFC Chairman Deepak Parekh accused the CBI of creating a fear psychosis among public officials. Whatever the outcome of the CBI's inquiry, what is certain is the controversy generated about the decision-making processes by the market regulator. Krishnanand Tripathi's report for Rajya Sabha TV.
Vinay, so there we have it, some very dramatic statements being made, and of course the paper has been covering this in great detail. You've got both accounts from Mr. Bhave and from the CBI chief. Did this come as a bit of a surprise, or suddenly a preliminary inquiry being launched into something which was a permission which was given several years ago?
Yes, of course, and it surprises more on account of the person involved in this investigation, so-called investigation that CBI wants to launch. It's about a decision taken many years back, and you're opening an investigation against a person who has impeccable record of public service. So in that sense, it came out as a surprise, and that is why there has been massive uproar about its consequences, the way it is being done, and what does it mean going ahead.
Well, the CBI, to play devil's advocate, the CBI has been really hauled up in the past as well for not taking proactive action. It's been called a caged parrot not too long ago in the entire Colgate scam. Is it really so wrong to say, because they have gone ahead to justify, the CBI chief, to say that we haven't accused anyone as yet, we're just saying that we have some evidence on the basis of which we want to start an inquiry?
See, there's nothing wrong. Of course, the first thing that we need to be clear about is that nobody is above law, no matter who the person is, and CBI, if it finds something, then it should investigate, and even if it retains to cases that or events that have happened earlier. But point is that, is there a method that needs to be followed? How is it that even before CBI thinks of a thing, it comes out in media, and we have a trial by media even before anything starts?
So the media leak is the problem. It shouldn't have been reported out.
Of course, it should be. A case should start only after you've reached a certain amount of logic behind that accusation. You just can't, just because you feel there is something wrong, you launch an inquiry, fair enough, you do your investigation discreetly, but why should it just become a trial by media? Suddenly things come out, you know, it's a slur that remains forever, that this person was investigated for wrongdoing. So it's kind of a whisper thing that keeps going on. Somebody points a finger and then CBI jumps into it. That's not the way of doing it, and we have had so many cases where CBI has eventually turned up nothing in the case. But the point is that if you open an investigation against a person, then that is part of the records, part of history right now, and it will continue for a while. So what, that person is under the watch for that while.
I just want to take a look at the case itself per se, but not to get into its merits or demerits. That's for the law authorities to decide. But here's a case where the CBI feels that it was wrong for the SEBI chief to give permission to Mr. Jignesh Shah to set up a currency exchange when there was an ongoing IT investigation pending against him, or there was a previous IT, not even ongoing, I think, it was a previous investigation that was pending against him. Mr. Bhave has come out with a scathing counterattack, saying that permissions were cleared from his predecessor's time, Mr. Damodaran's time. He's also said that perhaps there is a certain element of framing here, because another SEBI member has been named, not the entire board. Then you name all board members. Why just the chief and one particular member? And then he said, why bring it out, of course, in the open unless you have credible evidence?
So without going into things, let's just look at this case. Now, if let's say if Mr. Bhave was to be considered for something today, will you say that there is a CBI investigation going on against him and he should not be considered?
He shouldn't be given a role elsewhere in a different organization.
So it's like every agency needs to be that much more cautious when you point fingers, that it has consequences. So if you're saying that, look, there was an income tax inquiry and subsequently what happened? Apparently the income tax did not find anything in that
and
case.
Let's not forget that this is the same individual who's also, the promoter of a stock exchange right now, where the Forward Market Commission, there's a huge commodities obviously scam which has broken out. Again, same promoter family. And yet the exchange is running. Both MCX, the commodity exchange, and the stock exchange both are running.
So we have to be very careful in how we take things forward. It's just because things have happened right now, that doesn't mean that everything that was done 5 years back was had a underlying motive to it. So we have to be careful about that. If like Mr. Bhave is saying, if the process started in Mr. Damodaran's time, then are you going to investigate him also? So there is no end to these things. So you have to be cautious because there are people involved, and more importantly, what it does damage to your institutional decision-making structure. If every decision 5 years later is going to be opened up and subjected to CBI scrutiny, then are we empowering our bureaucrats to take a decision today? No, of course not. That is the kind of fair environment that it unleashes. So nobody is saying that you don't investigate wrongdoing, but there has to be a method to it so that you are not undermining the public confidence in the agency or our decision-making process.
Just an institutional perhaps oversight on part of CBI, not a well thought out decision, just that, or an element of personal vendetta or something else?
See, that is what always comes out in the case of CBI, that it is not seen as a impartial, politics-free institution. So it's the institution doesn't have a credibility that much, like Election Commission. We have built up that institution; it enjoys a certain amount of credibility. Does CBI have that amount of credibility? No. Every time CBI raises a red flag, you always think, oh, who's behind this? Why doesn't the thought come? Why doesn't that thought come? Look, CBI has found something, it is investigating. Why is it that we are always looking for a motive when CBI is involved? Obviously, it has to do with the institution, the way it is working, the way it is set up, the way its officials are appointed, that you need that institution to stand up on its own in an independent way. Then only these problems will not come. Otherwise, maybe there is a case, without going into the matter, maybe if there is a case, but then it's the institution that doesn't have credibility. You are CBI versus Bhave now. 99% of people are going to be with Bhave rather than CBI.
Yeah. Okay. Well, definitely a lot to think about there, about the CBI's own credibility as well. And at least it's one rare issue over which both the ruling party and the opposition were, talking on the same line, which is very rare for us. Okay. On that note, we're going to take a very quick break. But when we come back, we move from one controversy to the other. This next one at least seems to have quietened out for now. We're talking about Maruti-Suzuki's plans to set up a new plant in the state of Gujarat and investor agitation over the same. Welcome back. You're with Policy Watch. Facing sharp criticism from investors and even the possibility of regulatory action, Maruti-Suzuki finally agreed to water down its proposed investment plan in Gujarat. Now, the controversy had broken out last month when Maruti had surprised shareholders by announcing that the new car plant, which is to be set up in Gujarat, would actually be owned by its parent Suzuki Motor Corp and not by the Indian entity. Maruti was to buy cars made at this proposed plant and also pay a markup to its parent Suzuki to cover extra capital expenditure. Institutional investors, including 4 insurance companies and 12 mutual funds, described this deal as a quote-unquote blatantly wrong and value-eroding oppressive transaction. They said that this will reduce Maruti from being a car-making company to merely a trading company. In the new proposal, the plant will belong to Suzuki, and also all capital expenditure will also be borne by Suzuki itself and not Maruti. The company will also put this proposal up to vote before all its shareholders before implementing it. Vinay, that was a controversy and quite a lot of investor activism. We're not used to seeing that in our markets. Do you think investors have won, or too early to say?
Too early to say, but the fact that it is going to be put to vote, I think that is the important point. It was, let's say, it was a wrong decision as far as corporate governance is concerned. You have an existing publicly listed company, I mean, you have a minority shareholders. You are deciding to take production out of that company into your own 100% own subsidiary. Now, that's a very suspicious transaction, no matter what you try and justify, no matter what benefits you try and highlight.
Well, they tried saying that it's going to be great for Maruti because we don't have to bear the cost of setting up this plant, and most of the cost will be borne by Suzuki. But I don't think shareholders really bought into that.
Bought into that because Maruti itself, Maruti has a strong balance sheet with a surplus cash on it. So why are you justifying that Maruti cannot invest in its own, on the strength of its own balance sheet, or why does it, you can justify that you'll get cheaper funds from Japan or...
And it's not even a debt-heavy company. We're not talking about a major infrastructure or real estate company here.
Yeah, so it's a very suspicious thing to start with, that, what is the fear in this case? That gradually you'll all incremental production will move out from Maruti to the 100% Suzuki subsidiary. Subsequently, new plants that you set up will also belong to Suzuki. So gradually you will make this company a shell company, and that is just trading. So that is the...
But Maruti never said that. So were people just getting, were they just panicking?
No,
reading too much?
As an investor, that would be my primary fear. What is, if I am an investor, if I own Maruti shares, which I do, then in that case, what is my big worry is that going ahead, what is my value of my share, future value of the company, discounted cash flows. If I am worrying that my cash flows are going to come down gradually over the years, part of the company is going to move out, then obviously I am a bit worked up about what is happening to the company.
Maruti seems to be suggesting that it's really, doing shareholders a favor because not really technically required by law as such to put this decision to vote in the entire shareholders base, but they're doing it for the sake of good corporate governance.
That is why SEBI has got involved. If you're going to materially change the terms of a company, then ideally you should make open offer. Why don't you then buy out the minority shareholders? Look, we are going to do this thing. If you're not happy, then you exit the company. That is how it should be done in most situations. That look, we are materially changing the structure of the company. If you don't feel comfortable, we will buy you out.
Well, how do you rate the activism that we've seen from the institutional side, which is very rare in India?
That is heartening. That at least mutual funds and large insurance companies who had stake, they stood up and said, look, we don't accept this logic of yours, which was not the case, which has very rarely you've seen this kind of investor. There was a bit of, when Gujarat happened, there was a bit of talk there, but this is first time that we are seeing it go to some distance. Regulator has been called into action. So it's heartening development that going ahead, mutual funds, institutions which are big holders in most of our public companies.
And they've rarely come out in other cases to really voice their opinion as a group.
Idea is that you should not take small shareholders for ride. If you want to.
No, small shareholders would have still been taken, perhaps, quote unquote, for a ride had the big shareholders not
had the big, yeah. So that is the thing. And if actually you want, the right way of it is to doing is to put these decisions to the vote. If investors don't agree, then fair enough. Even there may be value in it, but if most of the investors don't feel that this is the right way, then you should not do it. And there was prima facie, there's something about deal that you don't like, It's a very suspicious arrangement, why are you
One
doing
couldn't
this?
fathom when you have so much of cash sitting.
Here, why are
you can easily invest in your own expansion. You
Yeah,
feel
so
your business will grow. Then
you
why
can
not
just, if
invest?
tomorrow, what if you start exporting from that plant directly tomorrow, so you take that business out of Maruti's and you say, okay, this plant will start exporting directly. So does that business go out? In future, so many things can happen which you might have addressed some concerns, but what about future going ahead? Is there a guarantee that things will not change? We won't have more plants coming up. There is just no way of knowing.
How does this play out, you think, now? Because the core of the matter still remains. Maruti-Suzuki is not saying that the plant will now belong to the Indian company. They're still saying the plant will belong to Suzuki Motor Corporation.
So the one point is that when they said when it's going to be transferred, then it's going to be at book value. So which is fair enough. So
Transferred from Suzuki to
Maruti's
at some point, if it is transferred.
At some point, which they intend to. So at that point, if you do it, and if it's due at book value, fair enough, then that means you're not taking profits out. And some other aspects have been also tweaked, I don't remember. But the moot point they're saying is that they will put this to vote. So if most shareholders oppose the deal, then it should not go through. That is the logic. And if you still want to go over it, then you just give minority shareholders an exit option. Okay, look, we are doing this, still going ahead with this. Do you want an exit option? You give an exit option. That is how, a material changes, business happens, then you take responsibility for it and you buy it out.
Well, let's see how the story goes from here. Definitely a very important development, not just for Maruti, but in general, institutional activism in India. We will take a very quick break on that note. When we come back, time to put the spotlight on the macros. We look at the currency, which has had a very volatile week. Wonder if the dollars will keep pouring in. Back in a moment. Welcome back. Well, it's been a topsy-turvy ride for the Indian currency this week. After a big slump that followed the US Federal Reserve's continuing stimulus withdrawal, Friday actually saw a smart pullback as FII dollars continue to pour in. Here are the numbers.
The Indian rupee depreciated 39 paise against the US dollar on Thursday, the biggest single-day loss in nearly 2 months. The US Fed has signaled a sooner than expected hike in interest rates. Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen hinted at a likely interest rate hike in 2015. The US Federal Reserve decided to continue tapering bond purchases and said it would cut bond purchases by $10 billion US. For most of 2013, the US Fed purchased bonds worth $85 billion per month. In December 2013, it started winding up its stimulus by cutting monthly bond buying from $85 billion to $75 billion. A further cut of $10 billion per month was announced in January this year. This week again, the US Fed also approved a cut in its monthly bond buying program by another $10 billion to limit it at $55 billion a month. As a result, the dollar traded strong against major global currencies and dollar index rose by 0.32% the same day. Economists fear that hardening of interest rates in the US market would reduce the attractiveness of investment made in emerging economies. The Indian market was expecting a complete withdrawal of US stimulus by the end of 2015. But recent signals suggest that this may happen 6 months before that. In addition, further pressures on the rupee is likely to come from month-end demand from importers. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
So, Vinay, this is the big conundrum, and it's quite linked with what's happening in general in the equity markets as well.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of euphoria, elections are happening, one thinks stable government, economy will kickstart once again. And I guess that's why the rupee is now what we're looking at levels above 61 after a long time?
Yeah, right. So it's a confluence of a lot of factors. But basically, our underlying theme is that our macro concerns or macroeconomy has stabilized, excluding inflation, which is also coming down. You find that your current account deficit is in control. Your fiscal deficit has been brought under control. There's still scope, but at least we have government has delivered on what it promised. So underlying the macro concerns have gone. So that is why we having this strength, or rather that is why we have not been hit so badly as some of the other emerging economies, because of this US steady scaling back of the US Fed's monetary stimulus. And overlying on top of that is your entire euphoria there in the stock market that is there, which is bringing in the dollars, as you say.
So lots of calls are coming in. I think Bank of America is now saying 59. Barclays again has some aggressive targets here and there. How much of this is based on real actuals, where we can expect this strength to continue, and how much is just a little bit of froth which builds into any market?
I think this, like with any other segment of the currency market, there's always a momentum play. When things go bad, then they start going bad. When we were going down, you remember that 68,
70,
69,
75,
people
were
were
getting all kinds of calls.
Calls. And same thing when we are on the other side, you will have the momentum. So it's never that, financial markets never stabilize at true value. There will be always overshoot on the either side. You will have on the negative side and on the. So we are seeing that bit playing out, that story playing out. So when the concern comes, then suddenly the rupee. So when the Fed taper thing happened on Thursday, then the rupee fell. Then again you realize, look, at the end of the day, what is happening? Fed is still buying bonds, 55 billion worth of still it's buying. It's not that all that has ended, it's only come down from 65 to 55. So $55 billion a month is still coming. So so that money is coming. So those then Friday you realize, okay, it's not much. So we go back to the other story that is playing out.
So the numbers have been very strong for India as well. I mean, if you look at March itself, you're talking, I think about 1.5 billion has come into equity, over 2 billion has come into the bond markets. So this dollar inflow is very strong. Is this a bit of an aberration, you think?
It's not an aberration, because you see what are we seeing till the time for the next couple of months, till May 16th. There's nothing happening. All we have is a promise of things will look up. There's no decision point that is going to come before 2 months. So what does the financial market do in this time? I mean, it's just a hope rally that will continue, because there is nothing, no fresh news is going to come in.
Let me ask you this, because most of our discussions on the show have centered around election for one reason or the other.
Right.
Is this really, a game-changing election for the economy per se, more than the elections in the past have been? Or are we just, building too much into this election result?
See, it's not about building too much. The fact is that we've had decision-making issues. A new government is supposed to come in, and hopefully things will start to move. We are already at the bottom, things can't get worse, So in that sense, things will take time to turn. But when the next government, presumably if a stable government comes, you are going to have decision making come in, and with other things falling into place, the economy should pick up. There is no reason to doubt that.
When one is feeling good, you tend to look at things which are, all positive.
Yeah.
The glass looks half full. It never looks empty. But there are the negative numbers, and I hate to be the doomsday, prophet out here, but there are numbers. Inflation has come down, but we know the damage to crops in the recent times. We know that our investment cycle is still pretty much at rock bottom. IIP numbers haven't moved. Growth numbers itself are abysmal, sub 5%. Should one be concerned looking at these numbers as well? Or is the CAD number the one to look at? This falling CPI number, is that the one to look at?
See, our biggest concern even today is, I would say, inflation. It is what is holding us back from every way. We can't relax our interest rates because of inflation. It's creating uncertainty vis-a-vis investments. So that part of the concern is still there, but that is also being addressed. At least RBI is not letting it go. It's keeping interest rate high despite the pressure from the different sides to let it go. Now, what does it do? Moment you have a new government, and if RBI and hopefully does not oblige, if it keeps interest rates high, then somebody has to address those issues, because if RBI is not going to oblige, you will cut rates, and you've got to get growth back, you've got to address inflation, then you will have to address the supply side issues, and then the onus is on the government, I think, which is what RBI is doing the right thing by keeping rates high, so that telling you, look, it is not my problem, you have created the problem, supply side inflation is there, and you have to find the solution to address that problem.
Sure.
So the next government that has to come, that government has to address the entire structural issues that are causing this high food inflation, which is spilling over into a generalized inflation. So those concerns are there, very much there. But the point is that, they are at the margin, they are there, but generally the story is that, look, things should look up. Global economy is also looking up. If our exports begin to look up, current account deficit will look up, we will be able to relax gold. So things should, it's
So let me end by asking you the most fundamental question. And I mean, if there's anyone who can answer it, it's you. You have the pulse of what's happening in the corridors of power here, where policy decision making takes place. What is the sense that you get when you interact with a lot of these administrative officials? I mean, what are they looking at over the next couple of months?
See, right now it's all stall. Because there's absolutely
has been over the past 1.5 years, since
things,
2G, since
Colgate, things did move over. I mean, to be fair, in the last 1.5 years, the government did quite a bit. So it's not that, but it's a sense of uncertainty. You don't know which government is going to come, what is going to happen. It's not there is it's I won't say anxiety, but there is heightened sense of expectation, what is going to happen, that is the issue. Everybody is hoping that it's a stable government, that is there, and the environment will improve. I mean, hopefully we'll be able to put all this baggage behind and start with a clean slate when the new government is there.
Well, that's a hopeful and optimistic note to end the show on as well. Thank you so much for being with us today. That's it on this edition of Policy Watch. Thanks for joining. We'll be back next week with more stories and more interesting action.